You're watching the video sermon podcast of First Baptist Church of Marble Falls, Texas. For almost 130 years, FBCMF has served Marble Falls and the greater Highland Lakes area faithfully through children's programs, youth activities, and adult discipleship. We invite you to join us each and every Sunday morning at 9 and 10:30 a.m. for deep fellowship, rich worship, and a spirit-filled message. For those who find themselves unable to attend on a Sunday morning, we stream those services. Simply visit fbcmf.live during either of our service times to view it. Never miss an archived sermon by subscribing to this podcast on YouTube by visiting youtube.com/FBCMFTube. And to learn more about our church or to listen to an audio-only version of this and other sermons, please visit us online at fbcmf.org.
The songs that we're singing, the one that we just sang, O Come, Emmanuel. What a song, Brother Dory and praise team. Thank you for teaching us, for allowing us to sing these deep and rich, theologically rich songs. They're biblical and they're exciting. To picture yourself and put yourself in the middle of the people of Israel that for centuries you had been defeated and you had been oppressed and shamed and humiliated and all of that. And then all of a sudden you have this news that the Savior is coming and you just break into rejoicing. Praise God, our humiliation and our shame is over. Someone's coming to bring us back to where we should be. That's what the Christmas songs are about, and they're so powerful in that. It's a great Sunday morning. I'm excited that our brand new Minister of Missions and Discipleship, Norman Flowers, and his wife Lori and their daughter Whitney are here this morning, and this is their first Sunday beginning with us. Thank you. Wherever Norman is, Lord, bro, we love you and we're glad you're here today. I think he's here. There he is. All right, buddy. Well, y'all, we're looking this morning at the unexpected people of Christmas. Luke 2 starts out and begins with a rather unexciting, though, and probably a depressing movement. It starts out, it begins well. It begins amazing in that place called Rome with Caesar Augustus and all of the power of that name and who he is and all of the pomp and circumstance and the control. In those days, it says Caesar Augustus issued a decree that a census should be taken of the whole Roman world. What power, what might. If we were in a movie, everybody would be on the edge of their seat at the beginning of Luke chapter 2. We would love it. Rome. It starts well. It starts with that place that is the most magnificent, the most dramatic, the most powerful place in the world, full of politics, full of intrigue, full of sacrifice and espionage. It's full of courage, all of those things. There is no better backdrop for a movie and a story than the place of Rome and its Caesars and Julius Caesar and Mark Antony and all of the battles. That's where it's starting. The story begins in a great place. But like a movie that starts out well and then quickly takes a bad turn, it moves away from that place that we expect could be the only place to make a difference in our world. Everybody would expect if there is a difference to be made in all of history and in the world, it's going to come from Rome. It's going to come from Caesars, only through them. But it moves away from that place and takes an unexpected movement toward a forgotten little area in the far reaches of the empire, somewhere out there, a little town called Nazareth. It's not even Jerusalem. We could have some respect if it had said Jerusalem. To move from Rome anywhere else is a downgrade, but maybe Jerusalem, well, a little bit okay, but it doesn't even say Jerusalem. It says Nazareth. Where the heck is Nazareth? The audience watching the movie or listening to the story at this point looks at one another with a sense of confusion, and they say, where in the world are we going? You remember in the book of John when the men begin to meet Jesus, and there is one of the early disciples named Philip, and he meets Jesus, and so he runs to one of his friends, a man named Nathanael, and he goes over to him and he says, Nathanael, I found the Messiah, and he is from, and Philip probably just coughs it out, trying to bury the place where he's from. The Messiah from Nazareth. And Nathanael, if you will remember, in the book of John, chapter 1, Nathanael responds, Nazareth? Can anything good come from that place? That's what he says. Luke moves from the noble people of Rome to the ignoble, shabby people of Nazareth. Are you with me? Then the main characters are presented. A poor Jewish carpenter, a Nazarite, Joseph, an unwed but expecting Mary, and then a group of lowly shepherds, low-life shepherds way out in the middle of some Nazareth countryside. If this is a movie, this is where people begin to walk out and chant, "We want our money back." If any of you had lived in the Roman Empire and you had began by reading Luke chapter 2, you might as well say with them, "We want our money back." This is not the trajectory of the story. You're moving away from the good story, away from Rome, and you're moving to the dullest, most ridiculous kind of place. We don't even know where this place is. Take us back to Rome. We like the empire. That's where we want to go. That's what we would do. Good news, though, is if you just hang on, don't walk out and demand your money back. If you just hang on to the movie, and if you just watch the story, listen a little bit longer, the good news is for the whole world that there is about to be poured out of this unexpected people in this unlikely place, good news for the entire world from that kind of a place. I suppose that's why I enjoy the Christmas musical that our church is about to do, the best Christmas pageant ever, because that's the idea. The joy in the musical comes at the very end with this unexpected family begins to do great things, and something wonderful happens to them. The Herdmans. The Herdmans were horrible, horrible children. It's when you're talking about them, it's very politically correct to say that. In fact, when the Herdmankins, when they didn't show up to church, it made church a better place for everybody. One little boy in the play said this, "The greatest thing I like about church is that the Herdmans aren't there." And the unexpected thing is something good is going to happen out of this unlikely kind of family. Well, maybe it's best if we just hear it from the kids themselves. And so, Helen Armstrong, is your Sunday school class here? We want to hear about this. Come on out.
Charlie, what is your favorite thing about Sunday school?
The best thing about Sunday school is there are no Herdmans there.
What did you say?
No Herdmans.
Now, Charlie, we must be careful what we say about others.
Yeah, if the Herdmans ever found out, you know what they'll do. Put worms in your sandwich.
Ants in your purse.
Your tires.
And much, much worse.
Those are terrible things to say.
But they're all true. The Herdmans are the worst kids in the history of the world.
The horrible Herdmans are the rottenest kids. Just wait until you hear about the things that they did. They hit and they steal and smoke smelly cigars. They ought to be arrested and put behind bars. There's nothing that those kids don't do. Nothing they won't do to you. Don't fight, you're always gonna lose. They'll find you and they'll pound you till your face is like a glue.
They can't be that bad.
6 of the Herdmans are like 60 of us. They bully little children, they spit and they cuss. They pull down your gym shorts and look up your dress. When they leave a classroom, it's always a mess. Why us? What did we do to them? Why us? How will we get rid of them? Help, please, there's got to be a way to run those Herdmans out of town to so far away.
Now, children, that's too much. Those kids can't help themselves. Their mother works so hard, she's never home. They're all alone.
You're so right. The poor little dears, they're a terrible crew.
The place they live is not a house, it's more like a zoo.
Bless their hearts, must they run wild in the streets? Why can't they be polite? Why do they cuss, lie, and cheat?
Bless them, they're a rowdy bunch, dear Lord. Tell them it's our time to punch. Please, please, will someone calm them down before those little hermits make a mess of our town? Yes, oh yes, they really make a mess. Yes, oh yes, it's such a mess. Wait for me, Lucy! Get to their places! Get to the road! Make a mess of the line! Into the airplane! Don't make it go faster! We're the horrible hermits and unbeatable squad! I'm Imogen!
I'm Ralph.
I'm Leroy! I'm Paul! There's Zoe and Gladys! We're small but we're mean! Just one bite from Gladys can sure make you scream! And now that it's Christmas, look what those kids have done! Lassoed all the reindeer in the town and pulled them down! And what happens like a Christmas tree in a spring of our glass? After the candy canes, we'll have a big sword fight. I bumped off Frosty's eyes, stuck a carrot in his chest. Someone ought to make a citizen's arrest.
Yes, oh yes, a citizen's arrest.
Yes, oh yes, a citizen's arrest. The horrible hermits that ruined our town. We dressed up the Santa to look like a clown. They're a natural disaster, a plague, a stampeding herd.
Someone set the Stanford shed on fire.
Who did it?
It was the Hermans, of course.
They are the worst kids in the history of the world.
All right, you herdmans, get out of here. Get out of here, man. Golly. You see, when you watch that play, you think, what good can there ever come from such a family as this? And you can't help but think of Nathaniel looking at Philip and saying, can anything good come from the place of Nazareth? But surprisingly, something more than good, something great comes from Nazareth, which forces all of us to draw the conclusion that when goodness and beauty and redemption pour out of something that we think is second class, it says something first about God and something second about all of us. Here's what it says about God. When the things that we don't expect end up being the most beautiful and end up doing great things, here's what it says. That for God, really, there is absolutely no such thing as anyone who is second class. We might see those types of things. We may put people in first class, second class, third class, and people who are no class, but not God. The way that Jesus came into our world and the way that he lived surprises everybody because it's unbelievably commonplace. That's Nazareth. That's Mary and Joseph and Shepherd. Unbelievably commonplace. But apparently the things that you and I think are commonplace are exceedingly special to God. As if somehow God looks to the things that are low and begins to raise them up, and begins to look to the things that are high and begins to bring them down so that all of his creation is able to look at one another in the eye. The place of Nazareth brought up, the place of Rome brought down, the mountains made low and the valleys made high. All throughout Scripture, this idea is seen. The poet talks about it throughout the Psalms. There is a theology here. Simply the movement from Rome into the place of Nazareth with these common kinds of people, that's what's chosen to be where Jesus comes from. There is a theology that's important. Choosing Nazareth, choosing a carpenter and a wife and shepherds say something that God really must care about the least of these, about small things, that maybe God's eye is even on the sparrow. It would have made sense a little bit in our day and time if it said, and his eye is on the eagle. But it doesn't say eagle, does it? It says his eye is on the sparrow. His eye is on Nazareth, and not Jerusalem or Corinth or Rome. His eye is on Nazareth. That's where Christmas begins. We were taught in seminary that God has a very special place in his heart for the hungry and the poor and the least of these, people who are oppressed, the alien and the marginalized. That is the group that Jesus was born into. That's the people. Jesus was not a man at the center of the powers of Rome and the empire. That's not where he came from. That's not who he was. Luke moved him away from the empire, away from the power structures and all of the control and all of the might and ability and the prestige and the popularity and the armies. God moves away from all of that. Jesus doesn't come from any of the empire and all of that it symbolizes. He comes from the place that's humble, and he comes from Nazareth. Jesus is a man on the periphery. Jesus is a man on the border. That's where he comes from, and that's why I guess I'm very often intrigued by the history of the church and how a group of people who claim to follow a man from the margins and a man for the margins became a church of center and a church of mainstream, and unfortunately, sometimes using all of the control, all of the tactics, all of the tools of the empire in order to promote ourselves and in order to promote our ministry or in order to promote anything that we want, using all of the tools of the empire to push us forward. And if we can align ourselves with the powers of the kings and the powers of the government and all these things, then maybe we can move forward too. But that's not how we began. And here is an amazing truth that in our world, we get so scared if the church loses its position, if something happens and we fall from that, and now other people have control and the church's voice and what we say and do in this room, and we're marginalized and no one cares. We get scared about that. And we think, how can we get back to this place where the church is elite and the church is powerful? How can we get back to there? But I want y'all to know the church has done its best work from the margins. When we're still in line with how Jesus came and the idea of Nazareth, that's where we are born. That's where it all began. The fact that the Christmas story comes down the way that it did says a lot about God for the Messiah. God chose little boring Nazareth over center stage Jerusalem or any of the other center stage towns. He chose a carpenter shop over marble columned palaces. He chose for Jesus 3 decades of anonymity over 3 decades of a life of popularity. Now, hardly anybody knew until Jesus turned 30 years old. He had lived 30 years. Nobody knew him. All of a sudden, he just explodes on the scene of the history of our world. And then when he comes into the world, those 3 years, he doesn't spend it trying to get the church and get back to Rome. Rome symbolized by all of its control and power. He doesn't. He knows, I'm living out Nazareth still. And so he begins to live as a servant. Isn't it amazing? With all of the power that Jesus Christ had, he could have gotten everybody and said, we're going to do it like Rome, but he doesn't. He begins to live like Nazareth in his life. He chooses to serve rather than be served. He has the moment where he goes down and washes all of his apostles' feet like a servant. If you want to be first, you have to be. He even chose, to my amazement, petulant apostles to be his number one followers instead of angels. He didn't do it the way that I would have done it. If I had to have number one followers who were going to take my message and take it in the world, I wouldn't have chosen the people that he chose. I would have chosen angels. I mean, the cherubim, the seraphim, Michael, Gabriel, those would have been my number one guys. With my guys, you're not going to have any of this rooster crowing business. With my guys, you're not going to have any of this, who's going to sit at my right hand and left hand. My guys are just going to full force. I mean, they're going to do whatever I ask them to do. That's who I'm choosing, not Jesus. Peter, Andrew, John, Matthew. Really? Jesus looks at me and he says, I'm Jesus of Nazareth. What do you expect? He lives his life. He one time let a woman from Samaria interrupt his rest. There's a stained glass window over right there. Woman from Samaria, John chapter 4. He comes to this place and he allows her story to interrupt his rest. We see in the Bible that a woman caught in adultery interrupted his sermon in John chapter 8. We see in Mark chapter 5 that there is a woman with a disease who interrupts his plans. He's going somewhere else. The woman with the disease shows up and she reaches out and touches the hem of his garment. And he says, who touched me? He allows the woman to interrupt him. He allows one woman with great remorse to interrupt his meal and eating when she begins to wash his feet and dry them off with her hair. That's Jesus. The fact that the Christmas story and this whole story comes down like that, the way that it does with these people, says a lot about God, who he cares about, what he thinks about. And when we are surprised by how it comes down, it demonstrates how far removed we are from him. It shows a lot about us. Because while God sees all of these common, unordinary, boring kinds of places and people, and he raises them up, he brings Rome down, he does all of these things so that people are looking at one another in the eye. We continue to do the opposite in our world. Our world enjoys separating the sheep from the goats, which is a privilege that only God has. But we enjoy doing it, separating the haves and have-nots and separating the important from the not important. In the book, Blue Highways by William Heat Moon, he writes about traveling all over the United States, and after going through several big important cities with its universities and with its huge businesses and corporations that have global impact, he finally gets out of all of that and he's heading to another city, and he drives out of College Station, and he's in Texas, and he drives through a little town west of College Station called Dime Box, Texas. Any of you folk ever been to Dime Box? He goes into a little cafe in Dime Box, and there he listens to people talk. And then he goes over to the barber shop, and he listens to the barber talk about his life, and he listens to him talk about that little town and all of the things that have happened, good and bad, in Dime Box, Texas. He wrote, I haven't paid $1.50 for a haircut in 3 decades. He comes out, and as he is driving off and he's leaving that dusty little town, he said, city people don't think anything important ever happens in a place like Dime Box. And usually it doesn't, unless you call conflict important, or love, or having babies important, or marriages important, or funerals important. See, all that's important. Very important, and it's significant. There is more significance and more importance in more places than you will ever know and you might ever think. And that's who God chose to bring about the Christmas story. And because of that, doesn't it make sense that if God would bring his own son into the world through the unimportant, unlikely places and the unimportant people, then maybe that God would do great things today through a lot of people who we might think have very little to offer. People who we think may not be all that important, the marginalized, the oppressed, maybe the messages that they would give. Maybe somebody who is struggling might have a better word to speak than we possibly know. Maybe they know it better than we do. Or maybe here it is. Maybe this is what it means. Maybe you don't think your life has a whole lot to offer either. Maybe you feel like Nazareth yourself. Do you ever feel like Dime Box? It's not that you in your life separate the sheep from the goats, but it's that everybody's always better. You're always the goat in your own mind. Maybe that's it. But I'll have you know, whether or not you feel like the unimportant one, or in your life, if you have mistakenly separated all of these things out and you really enjoy the Rome better than the Nazareth kinds of people, no matter where you are, I'll have you know that God brought Christmas about through Nazareth. And if you feel like Nazareth yourself, God can bring Christmas about through your life too. God does this. It means this, that you are more valuable maybe than you thought that you were. That you are important too. So if that's true, if God is doing this kind of work through us, if he is lowering the mountains, if he is raising the valleys, if he is caring for people in this kind of way, what do you suppose is the best posture for us to take in this world, being that this is how God works? Let me phrase it like this. What do you suspect is the Nazareth posture? There's a reformer named Ulrich Zwingli. I know it's a funny name, but he was a reformer in the 1500s, a contemporary of John Calvin and Martin Luther and all of those guys. One day, Ulrich Zwingli came to a point and he found himself at odds, though, with one of his allies, Martin Luther, and he didn't know exactly how to overcome this conflict. Who was going to bow down, him or Luther? Who was going to win the fight, him or Luther? He didn't know. And one day, he was way out on the side of a Swiss mountainside, and he's just watching in this tranquil kind of situation, and it hit him because he was watching this neat moment where two goats are walking across the hill on this little bitty path on this mountain, Swiss mountainside. One of the goats is ascending up the mountain on the path. The other goat is descending on the mountain, and they're both headed toward one another. They're not walking the same direction, and they're walking against one another. I know it's raining or something. Isn't that funny? We don't have rain for so long. I mean, it interrupts everything. Everybody's like, man, it doesn't matter what we're doing. Doctors going clear. Oh, hold on, it's raining. You know, we're... The two goats are ascending, the other one is descending, and he watches and he's interested because they're coming to a little narrow part on the mountain when there's not going to be enough room for them just to cross peacefully. And so he's wondering what's going to happen. Which one is going to win out? They're going to fight perhaps, and one is going to back the other one back down the mountain maybe. He doesn't know, and so he watches and watches. Finally they come to this point and there's not enough room to cross. They back up and he's thinking, here it goes. They're about to ram each other. I'm going to see it. And the one who wins will back the other one down the mountain. And they come up to one another, and instead of ramming, the one who is ascending the hill lays down on the ground, and the one that is descending on the hill steps on the other one and walks on him going down. And then the other one gets up and he begins to go up the hill. Ulrich Zwingli began to watch, and it came to him as he observed that the goat that was ascending the hill, ascending the mountain, he never would have made it. But he was able to get higher because he got lower. Because he did that. This idea of God coming into Nazareth, coming to these people, sending Jesus, isn't that the story of Jesus? Correct me if I'm wrong. Philippians says he made himself nothing, taking the very nature of a servant, and therefore God exalted him to the highest place. The posture of Nazareth means this: every day do something that you don't want to do. Every day serve somebody that you may not normally serve. Pick up somebody else's trash. Surrender your parking space. Surrender your seat. Surrender your position. That's what it is. Helen Keller once told the Tennessee legislature that when she was young, she had longed to do great things but could not. And so she decided to do small things in a great way. And so let's flip the narrative, church. Flip the narrative and become more like a God who is able to live in Nazareth, where there are no more, not for us, not in this place, there are no more unexpected kinds of movements. If somebody does something that's from the margins, we say, great, we always expected that. We're excited about it. We're investing in the margins. We're investing in people like that. We find where Nazareth is and we say, God must be working there. We find where people are in need and we say, that's where we want to be because that's where the wind of the Holy Spirit is. That's what we do. If there is an Uncle Eddie who crashes your Christmas party, then find something about him to be excited about. He is important. Find the herdman children in your life. Find the herdman adults in your life. And then invest in them. Invest in those who cannot repay you and wouldn't repay you. Invest in those that the world says does not matter. Find the people of Nazareth. Be the people of Nazareth because we are the people of Nazareth and our God is a Nazareth God.
You've been watching the video sermon podcast of First Baptist Church of Marble Falls, Texas. Never miss an archived sermon by subscribing to this podcast on YouTube by visiting youtube.com/FBCMFTube. And to learn more about our church or to listen to an audio-only version of this and other sermons, please visit us online at fbcmf.org.